Hello guys and welcome to Fresh Meat, IGN's brand new show that deals with all things horror and or horrible. Maybe more so the horror.
More so the horror.
My name's Tristan Ogilvie. Joining me is IGN's most evil resident. See what I did there?
It was amazing. It was very clever.
Lucy O'Brien.
Hello, Tristan.
You are, of course, a massive horror geek.
Well, yes, I'm a big horror fan, and I'm really excited to be talking about what we're talking about today.
Well, don't tease us with it. What are we talking about, Lucy?
So today we're going to be talking about two massive survival horror properties. One is newer than the other, so we're talking about Resident Evil and The Evil Within.
Yes.
Now, both of these are billed as survival horrors, and both share a very sort of recognizable DNA.
And that DNA is named Shinji Mikami.
That is correct. That is correct. So yeah, what I wanted to talk about today is we've just come off the back of Resident Evil Revelations 2. And we've just come off the back of The Evil Within's first DLC, The Assignment.
The Assignment, yep. Which you reviewed both of them for the site. I reviewed both of them. You're neck deep in gore.
That is correct. And what is so interesting about both of those games is how different they are. And more interesting is how The Evil Within feels, and indeed The Evil Within, like proper, the main game, felt a lot more like Resident Evil. The Resident Evil that we recognize than Revelations 2 did.
What is that? Like, I'll speak as a sort of layman. I mean, obviously, I've played the Resident Evil games, but my interest in the series sort of peaked with Resident Evil 4, like a lot of people. And then, you know, Mikami obviously left.
Yeah.
The series has kind of been in decline since then. And I mean, what is it that makes The Evil Within more Resident Evil than Resident Evil itself? Is it because it's, you know, it's a new IP, so to some extent it's not burdened by the kind of history of Resident Evil, even though it's kind of got the DNA?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, when Mikami sort of went about to, you know, creating The Evil Within, his goal was to bring back the era of survival horror, because he's essentially watched his baby, the Resident Evil series, become more of an action series. And so his whole sort of MD was to, not MD, his whole MO was to bring back survival horror, and he really did that in The Evil Within. Like I totally understand that not everyone was a fan of The Evil Within, but I really was. And for that reason, it's, you know, it's all about the scarcity of bullets. It's all about the environment being sort of part of the horror. And of course, it's about the ostentatious bosses and the atmosphere. And The Evil Within has that in spades. So moving ahead to the first DLC, The Assignment, it's going to be followed up with a second part. You know, this was a stealth game, which is
complete change of pace.
Complete change of pace, but it also shows that Mikami and Tango Gameworks are unafraid to try out new things and also move with the times a little bit. You know,
and that's exactly what Resident Evil is guilty of, right? It's trying to reclaim these past glories, I suppose, without really sort of thinking ahead or adapting to. I mean, aside from the fact that the new game is episodic.
That's right. Yeah.
Maybe arbitrarily so.
Well, that's a sort of superficial layer, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's sort of meaningless in the grand scheme of things.
It doesn't seem like Resident Evil is really, like Evil Within, open to trying new things aside from that episodic structure.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Revelations 2 was a good game. I enjoyed it. Like, it was an enjoyable horror experience, but it wasn't scary. And The Evil Within, I thought was scary. I mean, and certainly it really ramped up the tension. Whereas with Revelations 2, you know, it's this constant sort of the enemies become just heads to be popped, and that's it. And you sort of look at them as statistics rather than as something to actually be afraid of. And you know, we're coming up to The Assignment, and that was a really frightening game because you are weaponless. I mean, it's the ultimate in survival horror, really.
Well, I mean, you are certainly underpowered, not unlike Alien Isolation, which came out last year, and I guess what's also going against Res Evil in its current state is that the standard of survival horror games is kind of certainly over the past 12 months, Evil Within at the forefront, Alien Isolation, the PT, interactive
Demo,
trailer,
yeah.
which was a new sort of height for a sort of psychological horror, different to survival horror, I suppose, but and all these games are kind of overtaking Resident Evil. Resident Evil, to me, is still a huge brand.
Oh, it's massive.
But yeah, it's sort of been a series of diminishing returns since Resident Evil 4, and yeah.
But that's right. I mean, and what we're seeing with the Evil Within, and with Alien Isolation, and with in the indie space as well, with games like Amnesia and what have you.
Yeah.
We're
Outcast.
seeing an
Outlast. Outcast are hip hop,
and Outcast.
They're not very scary. Idlewild was pretty bad.
We are seeing a return to horror. And it's not just about survival. It's about the horror as well. And with Revelations 2, that's what was really missing. And I totally, admit that Revelations is a sub-series. We're not talking about the main series here. But by all accounts, Revelations 2 is more traditionally Resident Evil than the main series. Certainly with 6. And by all, from what I understand of 7, we're still continuing with this sort of more action-focused horror.
Yeah, and that's the other thing with the Resident Evil game that kind of turns me off, is that all these kind of story threads, and because I've only sort of dipped in and out of the series for the past few years, I don't really know what's going on. I don't know what's the main narrative and what's this, alternate timeline and all this kind of stuff. I can't keep it together. I just, the Evil Within... I think, is it true that Mikami has sort of said that he doesn't want to do a sequel to The Evil Within?
Well, Mikami's been very outspoken in the past about how he doesn't like sequels. And he's sort of said, well, horror, traditionally in the video game space, has suffered from sequelitis, which is essentially, of course, he's been burnt by it. As I said previously, like, he's seen a series just become more and more sort of diluted.
Yep.
But with that said, I can't really imagine that he's going to completely just discard the Evil Within or give it to someone else to take care of, because it really feels like it's just starting to, we had the main game, and with this new DLC, it's a really exciting new survival horror series, and it would be a real shame to see Mikami leave it just when it's starting to really find its feet. But yeah, who knows? I know that, like, it would be ridiculous for Bethesda and for Tango to just leave it there.
Yeah.
Because it's certainly kind of branded itself as the new era of survival horror, and hopefully moving forward, Mikami will be attached. Also, I think one thing that's really important to point out is that the Evil Within has Mikami's signature kind of quirk,
right?
Which was always such a big part of the Resident Evil series, and I found it was really missing in Revelations 2.
Right.
There was very little of that kind of weirdness that has defined Resident Evil, traditional Resident Evil for many years. So, for example, in the Evil Within, like, there are the statues that you have to shoot. Right. And there is one sequence that I remember that I remember playing, and I was like, this is so Mikami. It was when a rat runs across the floor, and it's got one of the statues on its back.
Right.
And it's just, that was just so classically Mikami, that weirdness.
Doesn't the assignment have the save game, where you save your game by sort of sitting down on a couch?
That's right. You sit down on a couch and a cat jumps onto your lap, and that's how you save. And when you want to leave the sort of the saving environment, you stand up and the cat jumps off your lap, and it's just those sorts of little quirks that really make Mikami's survival horrors stand out. So yeah, I don't want to write off Revelations 2 or the Revelations series, but it certainly did feel like it was a copy of a copy of a copy. Whereas I feel like The Evil Within is something really new and exciting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more of it.
So it's definitely an interesting time for horror fans, but we would love to hear from you, the horror fans. So let us know in the comments below what you think of survival horror, where it's at in 2015, where it's going. Should there be more Evil Within games? Should Resident Evil become a kart racer? I'll edit that bit out.
I would love to see that.
Yeah. But anyways, that has been the first episode of Fresh Meat. Thank you very much, Lucy.
Thank you, Tristan.
And yeah, let us know what sort of fresh meat horror topics you would like us to tackle in the future. For all things meaty, stick with IGN.